The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, welcome to the next installment of Recruiting Blog's free webinar series. Our webinar today is brought to everyone from SkillSurvey, a partner we are extremely proud to work with this year. SkillSurvey is an innovator in reference checking and has proven to drive clear business results for their clients. We generally don't like to give a commercial during our webinars. However, it's really important that we share great products with our community, and this is one of those times. So be sure to check your email after today's session so that you can take advantage of a free product tour as well as a great download that everyone will enjoy. As always, we love to have interactive sessions, so please be sure to enter all your questions related to the presentation today in the questions panel on the right side of your screen. All questions will be answered toward the end of the webinar. I'd like to introduce Brian Gilbert, Director of Business Development with SkillSurvey. Brian is certainly not a newcomer to presenting webinars to our community and has been one of our most popular presenters in 2013. As always, he has a great presentation planned for today, so please sit back and enjoy. Brian, welcome to the call.
Great. Thanks, Tessa. Good
You're
morning
welcome.
to everybody. And it's so great again, and feel wonderful to be back here with Recruiting Blogs. And the feeling is definitely mutual. We've certainly enjoyed the partnership this year, and we hope to grow this in the future. And a big part of my job within SkillSurvey is really I'm generally the center thrust behind our educational outreach to different partners, different channels, different publishers perhaps. And generally, I'm the guy that's in charge of coming up with new stuff. What are we going to talk about next? And really, you know, a lot of the work I do is external. You know, I'm not a sales guy. I don't do sales calls. I don't even give product tours. But the one thing I do talk a great deal about is really, and one of the things I learn a great deal about through direct contacts with our customers is really where the pain points are. Where the things that we struggle with day to day from the HR and talent acquisition suite. So, and getting started today, we're really going to, we're going to key on the pre-hire assessment candidate screening segment, and really just talk about is basic compliance enough, where the bar is, and is the bar high enough. And you know, one of the things that we really know is that the vast majority of clinical caregivers that are working in healthcare today, they really want to do the very best for their patients. And again, we're talking about the clinical caregivers, you know, the nurses, the doctors, the frontline teams that are really hands-on with patients. These people that work long hours, they put up with massive amounts of stress, and HR professionals like you are really no different. In fact, you could really say that both sides of that coin are really cut from the same cloth. Unfortunately, sometimes the effort and the work that is given toward creating some sort of lasting and positive change is hampered by other external factors. So sometimes those factors, they might be legal, they might be political, they might be economical in nature. And I think that here's a case in point. When we look at reference checking over the years, over the decades, you know, we look at this long historic view. It used to be a very pivotal part of the process. It was actually expected and really almost compulsory that a hiring manager would reach out to previous managers and colleagues for insight. And in a lot of cases, it wasn't punitive. It wasn't, hey, let me dig up dirt. It was more of, hey, what can I do to help he or she be more successful here in this role? It was more of that approach. And one of the things that we're really working toward at SkillSurvey is bringing this back to a position of relevance. And we believe it can be made relevant again because we've been doing it for over 12 years and really bringing new value and new meaning to the reference checking process. So back in the 1990s or so, the process of reference checking really became under fire from a legal point of view. And there were several large landmark cases that really forced a lockdown of sorts. And reference checking as a practice began to become much of an afterthought. If you can only get, on a rare occasion, name, rank, and serial number, then what's the point? So really, for those organizations that are out there and that are attempting to reference check today over the phone, and if you happen to be on the call today and are one of those poor people that just have to pound the phone and try to get blood from a stone sometimes, these people are not waiting on the other line to talk to you. It's hours of voicemail and email tag, weeks and weeks of time, and all for very little information that you can really use. Certainly nothing that's going to impact heavily on a hiring decision. Once in a blue moon, you might come across something, but generally you're not going to learn too much. So the breakdown of this system with the historic reference checking, I believe, was really one of the factors that allowed some pretty bad things to happen. And the story of Nurse Charles Cullen is back in the news again recently, just thanks to a new book that has just been published. The real issue with this story, that somebody like Charles Cullen could be allowed to move freely from facility to facility, it was simply that the system allowed for this to occur. It wasn't as if somebody dropped the ball specifically, but rather the pressure and the fear of litigation and liability was just far too great. So let's begin with a quick example here. I wanted to put together an illustration on how this same reluctance to provide full and accurate information still exists. So we're going to just come up with a nursing candidate here. Let's call him Charlie. His file comes across your desk. He's got about 9 years or so of solid clinical experience in a variety of different settings. He's pretty well traveled. Some of his background might be a little bit thin, but everything seems to check out. His background screen doesn't reveal anything troublesome. He's bounced around a little bit here and there from hospital to hospital, but he's got some pretty pat responses as to why, and they're pretty logical. The reference check comes back. Again, you get name, rank, and serial number. There's nothing reported positive or negative. So other than some bouncing around and some movement and some frequent stops at other hospitals, there's not a whole lot here to immediately discount this candidate. So you decide to go ahead and hire him. You onboard, and within about the first 6 months or so, it really becomes apparent that there are some distinct behavioral issues at play here. Our new employee, Charlie, has some problems with authority. He acts pretty defiantly in pressure situations. He also demonstrates a tendency toward chauvinistic behavior with female staff. He's a decent clinician, and he's pretty solid in the work ethic department. He's showing up. He's fairly engaged while he's there, but there are just too many issues with interpersonal behavior and some limitations there. So he's disciplined, he's reprimanded, due process takes its course, and then finally he's terminated. So, okay, that's the scenario. And what I painted for you probably resonates with a lot of you. I think we've all, in our careers, sat across the table from somebody. We've interviewed them. We've put them through our paces, made them jump through our hoops. And on the surface, you feel okay about this candidate. They ought to work out. Statistically speaking, that this hire should be a good one. And then it never. And there might. I'll go even a step further than that. There are going to be those times where you feel unbelievably strong and compelled to hire somebody. They interview so well, they ace it, and they absolutely blow away everybody that comes into contact with them, but they're not in the door 3 or 4 weeks and problems pop up. So let me continue with this scenario a little bit. You learn some things after the fact. You've now involuntarily terminated Charlie. And a few months later, a new employee mentions just in passing that they actually used to work with this guy. And a couple questions, a little bit of mild digging. You look back at the file, a quick check of LinkedIn, you see a former colleague in common, maybe you reach out via email and voicemail just to see, and it becomes apparent that this is a trend, that this was certainly inherent in his personality and DNA, that these behaviors were obvious and evident at previous positions. The neutral references that were given made no mention. The questions weren't asked on a typical reference check because typically people are not going to share much of that information if ever. The official references confirm dates of employment, position held, and maybe rehire eligibility and nothing more than that. So where does this leave us? I think reference checking as a check-the-box type of exercise is no longer the only or even the best option. I think everyone would probably agree that human behavior is extremely difficult to change. People generally revert back to natural, known behaviors at some point. And at SkillSurvey, we feel that candidate assessments are a great tool. They can show you a candidate's potential. But we also think that in contrast to that, references are truly unique in that they're the ones that can really tell you how a candidate has performed historically on the job. So we get into areas of compassion and empathy and purpose, and are they intrinsically motivated? Do they deeply have a drive for this type of work? Well, that personality test or that psychocognitive test might tell me upside potential of that candidate, but their 3 former managers and 3 former colleagues can tell me with pretty close accuracy how it's gone historically. So I think that's really the difference between a reference assessment like we provide at SkillSurvey and a candidate assessment in which you're really getting everything just through the lens of the candidate. Now, in terms of the different types of behavioral feedback, obviously dates of employment, rehire eligibility are very important, but these areas, interpersonal skills, work ethic, tendencies toward violent behavior, these are key input points, and these are very important behaviors too, and they can't be overlooked or neglected. So from today's approach, your workflow probably looks a lot like this. So in no particular order, there's a stack of applications and resumes that come across your desk. You do a bit of a whittling down process. You proceed with some phone interviews, whittle it down a little bit further. Then you move to a face-to-face. And then for the candidates you really truly like, maybe a small handful or maybe just 1 or 2, some sort of personality or behavior assessment which the candidate directly participates. Well, generally candidates in today's job market are going to be well prepared, probably more prepared than ever before in terms of all of their answers. And they know the most commonly asked questions. There are blogs, there are books, there are study courses that can really do a very fine job at schooling up and training up a candidate to go through those paces. Now, from the references perspective, if in the rare occasion you do get a hold of somebody that is willing to talk with you over the telephone, they're generally going to parrot back everything the candidate has told them to say. It's over the phone, it's direct. There's a direct link between what they say and their name, and your candidate knows it and your reference knows it. So if you've ever had a chance to really speak with somebody over the phone, generally if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. This is the old adage, and typically people are very reluctant to trash anybody over the phone, even if it's true. I mean, the liability, being sued for libel and slander, it's very, people are generally very cautious. So if you do get feedback over the phone, it's typically going to be just the good stuff and never the bad stuff. So the new paradigm that we're creating at SkillSurvey, this is 12 years or so in the making, is that instead of the telephone, we're going to have the references, again, select their pool. We're going to have the candidate select their pool of references. So let's say you stipulate, I would love to get feedback from 3 former managers, 3 former coworkers. And if you think 6 is too much to ask for, you'd be surprised what you can get when you ask for 6. You might not get 6, you might get 5, but think, the more you ask for, the more ultimately you get. So you have your 3 former managers, 3 former coworkers, and they are put through a survey. And their survey is built around specific job attributes, behavioral attributes germane to success in being an A-plus player in that given job role. So 315 plus specific surveys in our library. A good many of them deal directly with healthcare, all built around the behaviors that have been validated for job success, lower turnover, new hire job satisfaction, hiring manager job satisfaction. Over and over again, the validation levels continue to be very, very high in our data. And we're asking about not just did they work from this date to this date and would you hire them again. We're getting information in terms of work ethic, dependability, integrity, so on and so forth. How do they work and play with others? How do they receive constructive criticism? How coachable are they? How do they really work under pressure? If you think about it, the hospital setting, the healthcare setting, is one of the most pressure-packed workplaces. It can be extremely boring at times, but it can also be white-knuckle, hair standing on end at other times too. And yeah, it certainly takes a special type of personality type to be successful long-term in that type of role, and we help you find them. So just in comparison, a real quick side-by-side, the online solution stacked up against the typical phone check. So typically we're going to get, on average, system-wide, we're getting about 4.5 references back per candidate, and that's across 750-plus customers from a variety of different industries. We're getting over 50% of which are our former or current supervisors. You're usually lucky if you can get 2 or 3 people to talk to you over the phone. It's also very quick. Our average time to a finalized report is 1.92 business days. As you know, compared to a typical phone check, it's a whole lot quicker. We also tee up some resources for the hiring managers to be able to lead and assist in the interview construction in terms of what questions to ask and where to spend time. About 5 to 10% of the time, we're actually going to give you information as brought through from the references that are going to cause you to tap the brakes and pause a hiring decision, something that rarely happens over the telephone process. There's also a passive sourcing element here in which at the end of the survey, the references are invited, hey, how about you? If you think about it, it's built on the premise that we like this candidate, we're probably going to like their references. So they're asked to opt in to learn more about opportunities at your organization. So there's a passive sourcing element to this as well, and it's extremely compliant with very low legal risk, if any, because it is so consistent. It's very even-handed. We've shown zero adverse impact and demographic bias across the process. So in a typical phone check, again, it can be variable. Who knows what's said over the phone? Is it being recorded? How can you prove it? It's generally going to have a little bit more inherent risk in that process. And I mentioned before, every once in a while you're going to get information back on a candidate from their references that is really going to cause you to rethink the hiring decision. But 80 to 85% of the time, you like that candidate, you like them enough to go ahead and put them through the SkillSurvey process. Well, guess what? The references, they're going to agree with you. Very minimal developmental need. Now, this middle portion, this yellow portion, moderate developmental need, 10 to 15% of the time or so, you might come across some feedback that might cause you to pause a little bit. But then when you think it through, it might be something that's extremely manageable. It might be something that, hey, knowing that this candidate might have this set of limitations might be one thing, and it might be something very minor as compared to their upside potential. You know what? That might be a candidate you want to roll the dice with, and let's go ahead and give them a shot. But knowing and understanding that maybe their onboarding has to be modified a little bit. Now, on the other hand, 5 to 10% of the time, pretty profound, great developmental need. This might be the group of candidates that you want to run screaming the other direction, but that ultimately is up to our customer. I mentioned the element of passive sourcing here, and it is significant. Let's say a hospital has 100 job openings. Let's say 3 candidates apply and are skill surveyed. Each on average 5 references or so per those 300 candidates. That's going to be 1,500 potential new references or contacts that can be added to your database. Now, about 65% is our average opt-in rate for learning more about future opportunities at your hospital or your organization. So you're going to be able to add upwards of 500 or so passive candidates back into your pool. And we know that sourcing, and we know that finding new candidates and finding hard, sometimes it's hard to fill. Sometimes it's trying to find that next manager that has some real good experience. Well, these candidates can actually be a direct pipeline into some of those higher value future candidates as well from a passive standpoint. I had mentioned science and some of the risk involved with reference checking, and science and how compliance and data are really closely linked in this conversation. And we're asked all the time, well, you're asking a group of references to weigh in on a candidate. Aren't they afraid should I be afraid of getting sued? Like, where's the risk in this, and how do we manage that? And I know HR generally, nowadays anyway, seems to be more of a conversation about how do I manage and negotiate risk than it ever has been before. And unfortunately, I know a lot of you on the call probably can directly relate to what I'm saying there. But here's the good news. We've done all the homework. We know, for a product like this, for a process like this, online automated reference checking, reference assessment, it's got to all be about the science. And we're from the top down at SkillSurvey. Science is really, interwoven into our ethic. It's not just a marketing term or a buzzword, science and validity and reliability. It's got to be, really inherently built into our platform. So everything is really constructed from an IO psychology basis. The questions, they do validate. They do point to direct trends in future behavior and future success on the job. And we've proven that time and time again. And we've also proven, and with real customer data, over years and years and years of research, that there's no difference between subgroups and protected groups in terms of, the areas the EEOC and the OFCCP are going to look at. And it's an extremely standardized process. So it's something that is very repeatable. It's like that magical golf swing that everyone wants to hit the ball straight, but repeating the same swing time and time again is difficult. Well, that's really what the OFCCP and the EEOC want. They want the same thing done every time, and they want it to be done fairly and consistently across all units. So this will probably be the closest we get to an infomercial here. I just want to take you through a brief timeline in terms of how this process works. And I know a lot of people generally tend to be a bit skeptical. You send these requests out for references. It's online, so it's got to be involved with email somehow. How do you do that? Because, the skepticism is, hey, if I'm a reference, I get this email to take a survey on somebody I worked with 2 years ago. I don't know that I would do that. How many references really actually respond? Well, it takes the recruiter. I'll just take you through the life cycle here. So you, the recruiter, to put your candidate into the system takes about a minute. It really amounts to name, email address, and the position that you're screening for, or the candidate is screening for, I should say. And then you click go, and then at that point you're done. You're out of the equation, and you can go on to different things. Now the candidate, they take over at step 2. It takes them about 5 minutes or so to enter in their business references. These are former managers, former coworkers. They're also, they receive an email from the system, from you, that says, hey, we do our reference checking online. It's very simple. If you have questions, click here, but click here to get started. It opens up the site. They put in their references. It takes them about 5 minutes. From that point, the references take over. It takes the references maybe 8 to 10 minutes or so to take the survey itself. It's anywhere from 25 to 30 questions in length. There are a couple of free-form text fields that they're invited to fill out in terms of strengths and weaknesses, but typically overall it's about a 10-minute process for the references, and then they're done. And then once everything is brought back in, all the references have weighed in, it takes a couple of seconds for the report to generate, and in step 5, that report is made available back to the recruiter. So this is step 1. So this is the candidate is getting this email, and typically what would happen is the recruiter, the HR manager, the hiring manager would clue in the candidate to say, hey, look, we like where this is going. Our next step in the process is a reference check. We do it online. It's very simple. Check your email and look for the link. Click on the link to get started. So the candidate, obviously, they want the job. They want the gig. So they're going to follow through with this pretty quickly, especially when the expectation has been set up front. Okay, we do this online. This is our system. This is our model. So generally, you don't get a whole lot of pushback from the candidate. So it explains here's what's going to happen. You can review a sample of the questions that are being asked. No one is going to see your references responses, and the responses are directly submitted back to SkillSurvey, and the report is aggregated. So basically, the visualization here in the report is a aggregation of all of the references, feedback, all blended together. And Of course, the candidate waives liability, isn't going to sue anybody, and the references will do that in a minute too. So this is what the references see. Now this email is coming from the candidate. It's not coming from you, and it's not coming from SkillSurvey necessarily. It is as if it's coming from the email address given by the candidate. So it reads, I'll paraphrase a little bit just for speed here. I'm pursuing a professional development opportunity. I would like to use you as well as several others as a professional reference. All you need to do is complete a short survey. It's confidential. It's web-based regarding my skills. No one is going to see your individual responses. This is key here because the system averages the responses and produces one summary report. And then to further ensure confidentiality, the report can't even be generated unless at least three people feedback. Now, here's the other part. Now, for those of you maybe wondering, okay, I get this sounds good, but do people really do this? You will be responding as an individual, not as a representative of any company or organization. I've executed a legally binding agreement releasing you and your organization from any liability for providing this information. So, reference reads that. Basically, it's a former colleague asking for a favor, and that's really what this amounts to. So they click through, and they are taken to the survey. Now, the survey is, it's on an extent scale from 1 to 7. You can see here. There's also a column for not observed. So if they put Uncle Fred or Aunt Ethel down as a reference, they've never worked with them before. Maybe they have, but let's assume they haven't. Then a lot of these questions are going to be extremely difficult to answer. And you're going to know pretty straight away that if you see a lot of NOs, they're not a viable reference. So the recruiter has the opportunity to kind of go in and kind of look at that and reconnoiter it and say, hey, you can provide somebody else if you like, and kind of add to the process. But generally, this is all built around behavioral attributes that are relevant to an A+ player in this specific job role. Whatever that job role may be, we cover 2,200 different job titles across 317 or so surveys. So there's a huge scope here. But in terms of clinical and healthcare, and even roles in your hospitals that aren't clinical, your customer service, your finance, accounting, environmental services, your C-level positions as well. This can really be scaled to any area within your organization. So I just wanted to show you a quick example of what a strong and what a weak report would look like. These are for RNs. And the strong report here, again, you can see that the scores, the relative distribution is high or very high. And this is as benchmarked against, I would probably say, maybe 10 to 12,000 other RNs that have come through our system. So it's not just scores in a vacuum, it scores against a benchmark, which is really important. The orange line represents the manager feedback. Our customer said, hey, it's great to know what the aggregation says, but I'd really love to know what the managers say. So we've broken that out. The blue bottom line represents all the references. And then as you go through, you can read cluster by cluster. We actually group the behaviors in these different behavioral clusters. Cluster 1 would be professionalism. Perform job duties reliably, show a high level of dedication, take responsibility for his or her actions, remain current in technical and professional knowledge, pay close, thorough attention to details. All very important skills from a professionalism standpoint to be an A+ player as an RN. And the way these questions are structured, the way they're worded, and the way they're presented in the survey has all been developed by our IO psychology team with a heavy, heavy background in assessment construction. Now, this would be what a low-scoring candidate would look like in contrast. So you can see the scores are going to range from low, medium. There's a couple high in there too. And this actually is not atypical. If you see some high scores, some medium scores, and some low, if you think about it, even your most disastrous candidate has come in, maybe they're a complete mess. But there's got to be something redeeming, something redeeming in their personality DNA. I guess on a baseline. So it's rare you just see low, very low. Sometimes you'll get a little sprinkling of medium and high in here, but you have to dig a little further. And as you dig through, you can actually see consistently the managers are rating this candidate lower than the pool of references, meaning that the colleagues are vouching for the behaviors. However, the managers see it differently, and that's something that, in terms of report interpretation, and that's something we train our new customers on, how to really dive deep into the weeds and understand these reports. You get a heavy dose of that. And we're not only, I'm showing you cluster 1 here just for time, but we're also going to feed back in areas of interpersonal skills, their problem solving and adaptability, their personal values, belief structures, and also in clinical roles, HCAHPS. And here's an example. Monitor patient status, take or advocate for corrective action when appropriate. So there's a heavy element in here. If you read these different entries, we know value-based purchasing and HCAHPS and the opinion of the consumer as they leave the hospital post-discharge. We know that the big portions of that are weighted in the areas of listening skills, communication skills, and patient respect. Those are really kind of the trilogy of the key main behaviors. And there are others, and there are other nuances to this, but you can see that, listen carefully to patients and coworkers, taking time to understand and ask. Well, you can see here that the managers actually think they're doing a decent job of that, but the rest of the colleagues, not so much. And that's why that yellow flag is there, that triangle. It's showing you that there's more than there's 3 or more degrees of separation between the raters. So we get very granular with the behavioral feedback, and even more so when we go to verbatim. So I mentioned that there were the free-form text fields that references could participate in, and hey, give us 3 relative strengths to this candidate. Well, they're reliable, they're dependable, they're flexible, easily apply knowledge to everyday practice, they're adaptable, all good stuff. Good team player, good team worker. But then on the areas of improvement, could be more positive, could be more enthusiastic. Again, these are pretty big behaviors. It's one thing to apply knowledge into everyday practice. I mean, that's more of a hard skill. But how about the soft skills? Somebody that's been around the block a whole lot more than I have told me once that hard skills get you hired, while soft skills tend to get you fired. So the soft skills, and meaning the behaviors, the hard skills, yes, I can run an IV, I can administer a catheter, I can, do my checklists, and I know the tab A and the slot B mechanics of my role. But can I articulate, and can I communicate, and can I get my ideas across to a patient and their family? Can I be positive? Am I good to be around? Do I add value to the team? You can see here that there are definitely some areas where this candidate struggles. Obviously we've redacted some of the names where they're mentioned, but you can definitely see that there's some pros and some cons, some good and some bad, some strong and some weaknesses here that really need to be factored in. A lot of times, from what I'm told from our customers, they go right to this, and they read the verbatims first, and then with that in mind, they go back through the qualitative ratings, and they use that to decode what they're being told here. So it's interesting because you're getting information from a couple different vantage points. Now, as a best practice, I can tell you one of our customers, they're not a hospital, but they're probably well known in your neck of the world, GlaxoSmithKline. They were utilizing phone reference checking for a long, long time, and they were really getting not much value out of it. They came across SkillSurvey, found out there's a better way to do it. Initially, they looked at this as a way to just save time and not make phone calls anymore. And on the face value, that was great, and that was kind of a deal sealer for them. That they felt like, hey, we can save some time, we can free ourselves up to be more productive, and that's a win. But then what they were getting back, when they really got into the reports and they looked at the data and they looked at the analysis, they were learning all kinds of great things about their candidates, but a lot of times they were learning, 5 to 10% of the time we were changing hiring decisions. This is after the job offer goes out. So if you're getting information back on a candidate 10% of the time, in areas that they're weak, in areas that are troublesome, they figured out pretty quick that, wow, we're in a position where we can move our reference check earlier. And they moved it all the way back before the hiring manager interview. Now, from what I'm told, many of our customers do this. but not all of them will do it before the first hiring manager interview. In a lot of cases, our hospitals will bring them in for an interview, and then they'll bring them in for a final. And somewhere either before the first in-person interview or before the last in-person interview, the skill survey takes place. And the skill survey allows for a kind of a remap of the behaviors so that some targeted behavioral-based interviewing questions can be brought in for that candidate based on the reference feedback. So it's a real effective way to do it. But really, when you think about it, it does make sense. If you're able to get a hold of this fantastic information, direct feedback from references, why wouldn't you take advantage of that? So it's really important to point out that, yes, you can keep reference checking at the very bitter end of the workflow all the way at the end with the background, the criminal, and the drug test and all that stuff if you want to, but you have an opportunity to kind of re-examine and refocus how we interview and how we screen. And it really helps build some credibility and some trust with the hiring managers where you're able to give them a full behavioral 360 on the candidate before they sit down with them. And imagine how the quality of interviews go through the roof. I mean, it really can be a tremendous asset. So just something to think about. There's also the ability to create a comparison report between candidates. So let's say you have 5 candidates that are all kind of vying head-to-head for one position. Not an uncommon scenario. You can stack rank candidates based on the responses and the relative strength of responses against the benchmark. So it's a nice asset to have. So I think when pre-hire assessments, whether they're candidate assessments or reference assessments like we do, when it's done properly, it can really be a big win. You're talking about increasing the quality of hire, doing it faster. It's rare in a business process where you can improve speed and quality simultaneously. Usually, you have to give up one to get the other. And also cost. So there's 3 things. You have cost, you have speed, you have quality. And another old adage I've been told, you can pick 2 of the 3. You can't have all 3. Well, this is one of the rare cases where, cost is generally pretty low for something like this. And a lot of folks are surprised at how reasonable economically that this type of system can be, but you can get the speed and you can get the quality simultaneously. You're getting into areas where you can begin to have a forward look at turnover, at cultural fit, and employee engagement while reducing risk. Now, if you do this willy-nilly without a whole lot of eye to compliance, and if the pre-hire assessment is not compliant, if the vendor that's providing it hasn't done the homework and hasn't done the research, all sorts of bad things can happen. So I think the better process here is that there's definitely a clear ROI. A lot of times that ROI is drawn based on bad hire avoidance. So based on survey feedback from references, we were able to avoid 4 bad hires in the first quarter of this year. There's a way that you can pretty much draw a straight line to that. In fact, we have a customer that we just recently closed up a validity study. We're getting ready to publish those results. We analyzed 16 months of their data. Took our data, took their data side by side. The bad hire avoidance savings was $847,000 over those 16 months. We also found that low-scoring candidates were 227% more likely to be fired, to be involuntarily termed. So the ROI can be turnover, it can be efficiency, it could be the passive sourcing, it could be finding hard-to-fill positions and management positions, and uncover some gems along the way. And it's also a quick implement, pretty easy win. We're talking minimal training. It's web-based, so there's no software to install. You really don't need your IT team to get too involved with this, which is probably to their delight and yours. So it's a pretty clear win across the board. And anything we can do, whether it's elevating recruitment's role or elevating HR's role, unfortunately, the more time I spend with practitioners, with our customers, doing some case study work and just, speaking at conferences. I do a lot of traveling and actually getting ready to head on out to Arizona for a conference this week. But the one thing I know is that there's constantly a stream of study topics at state SHRMs or each, different through different conference channels that we work with, where I see HR's place at the table. elevating HR's role. And it's not easy to do because HR is so frequently left out of the conversation. And I can't think of a more pivotal piece of the puzzle that has to work and has to be firing on all cylinders for long-term sustained success at an organization. It's just mandatory that that work, that talent acquisition be in lockstep. And this is certainly a big tool in the tool belt to see that improvement going forward. So any opportunity that we can give HR to jump up on the roof of the building and scream to the mountaintops that, you know, there's a win, you know, we're all for that, and we certainly want to help support that mission. So we left a little bit of time here. We're kind of coming down the home stretch, but we do have a little bit of time for some questions. My email's here if you'd prefer to ping me on email directly any questions that you might have you don't feel comfortable asking here, or LinkedIn as well. I'm a massive fan of LinkedIn. I love it. So if you're on LinkedIn and would like to connect, please feel free. I'd love to talk with you. So I'm going to go ahead and bounce this on back to Tessa to see if we've had any questions come in.
Great. Thanks, Brian. We did have some really good questions come in, so I will go ahead and start with those. The first question is, can something like this integrate into our hospital's applicant tracking system?
Great question. Yes, it can. And I think we're getting more and more questions on this only because I think as it's become with open APIs and with the ability for disparate systems to kind of interconnect with one another, it doesn't necessarily have to be like it used to where you bought this company's badged solution and you're now painted into a corner because now it's only compatible with certain things. Well, now pretty much everything is compatible with everything else. So that's a great thing. But yes, we are integrated with several applicant tracking systems, most of the popular ones. I can tell you we're integrated with Taleo Enterprise Edition, Connexa Brass Ring. That's a newer partnership alliance for us, but it's one we're really proud of. iSIMS as well, Healthcare Source. So there are others, and we're in a mode right now where we are looking to add more and more to that partnership alliance group as we go. So we're probably going to integrate with 3 or 4 more between now and the end of the calendar year, and I know it's a big part of our plans for next year. So it's likely that if we don't have your applicant tracking system integrated today, it's likely that in the very near future it'll be on our product roadmap to launch. So, but again, the one thing, I mean, it does save time. It's so nice to be able to just click, you know, run SkillSurvey report, depending on how your system is set up, and we just grab the data we need, and it goes up into our system, and then we return the link to the summary report, and that's it. I mean, it's very simple. You don't even have to enter the name, the email, and key, you know, drop down the specific job rec that you're screening for. We just grab what we need from the ATS, and we just do our thing on your click. So it's a beautiful thing when it is integrated. However, we have a lot of companies that have an applicant tracking system that we freely integrate with, and they use SkillSurvey kind of in the cloud, just on a website browser bookmark, and the two are not integrated because it's so easy to do, and they just haven't really invested the time or the energy into integrating it. So it's not a requirement. It's pretty cool when it is integrated, but it's kind of a nice to have, not a gotta have, if that makes sense.
Yes, definitely. Great. So then one of the other questions was regarding sending skill surveys earlier in the hiring process. Does this jeopardize candidate careers if they're not they are currently employed?
I mean, we rarely hear any pushback from candidates or from customers that are, you know, trying to adopt this from, you know, put this in a new place in their hiring workflow. I think because it is a bit, they don't have to necessarily use their current manager. They can use previous managers as well. So the hiring manager, the HR manager that's actually ordering the skill survey from the recruitment side can stipulate, hey, I want this many managers, this many previous managers, this many previous colleagues. And they don't have to use the one that they report to today. They can use previous ones. And The wording in the survey itself, like the wording in the email that goes out to the reference, it's vague, and it's purposefully built that way so that it's not like, hey, I'm leaving. It's just that I'm looking at a professional development opportunity and would like to get some feedback. So it's a little bit vague. Would it maybe raise twitch the radar a bit? It might, but typically, just the same as if they were providing references to interview, conventionally. Whether sometimes companies call those references really early in the hiring workflow. So I think it really depends on individual preference, but I think the benefits far outweigh some of the smaller inconvenience in terms of maybe a candidate saying, hey, I don't want you to do this yet. I don't want to list this one reference yet because he's my boss. And those are generally a case-by-case type of exception.
Wonderful. And when is the authorization for release document introduced in the process?
It's introduced twice. The authorization to release is keyed by the candidate, and that would trigger whenever the skill survey is ordered. So you go ahead and put the candidate in, hit go, then the candidate clicks on the link. Now, the whole time this process is happening, we have a clock going in the background. So we're monitoring how long it takes the candidate to respond, also how long it takes the references to respond to. And part of that candidate process is, okaying, releasing the liability for this to occur. They do not get a copy of the reference check. It's not a credit report. We're not assigning numerics to anyone's name. So from a compliance standpoint, from a legal standpoint, it's very sound in terms of the fairness and just in terms of the interpretation on what exactly is happening here. That's not to say you may not get a candidate that wants a copy, but you certainly would not typically provide a copy to the candidate, just out of interest to what's occurring here.
Gotcha. And along the lines of the legal aspects, does this work for legal field as well in regards to attorneys?
Oh, it certainly does. Yeah, we pretty much, if you could dream up an oddball type of job title, we've covered it. We have done a lot of this work on a custom basis. We might have a company that says, hey, we have a very odd request for a survey. Would you build this for us? And we would, our IO team would go out and seek out the right resources to go ahead and construct the survey. But at the same time that we're customizing that survey, we're probably developing a parallel that's non-customized and introducing that out into the library. So it's one of the ways that we've been able to grow the survey scope up to 300, and I think it's up to 317 at this point, surveys. Everything from airline pilot to actuary to several different versions of sales, everything from inside sales, outside sales, customer service sales, route sales, remote sales. I mean, you name it, we've covered it. Probably a dozen different variations of nurse, ER, pediatric, OR, hospice care. I mean, it's almost endless. So, we certainly have a lot of the bases covered. And if for whatever reason there is a base that we haven't covered, we'd be happy to talk about it and see if we might be able to build something for it.
Great. Well, one of the questions was about the success with staffing companies. Have you been working with those as well?
Yes, we have. I think staffing is a little unique in that staffing companies may see this as a solution that would be good for some customers, but not for all. And good or bad, or accurate, inaccurate, there's a perception out there that staffing companies are typically going to be primarily interested in the speed and time to fill type of metrics, and maybe not so oriented toward the quality of hire. Now, there might be exceptions to that, and there always are, but I think that, given that you're able to take a process that generally takes a week, sometimes more, to process, running people down over the phone to beat a reference check out of them, as opposed to just clicking it in and doing it automated, that's certainly a win. And even if there's a staffing company that is completely bound by time to fill and efficiency, and really doesn't matter to, doesn't pay too close of a mind to the quality of hire. Sometimes saying that, hey, we can help you avoid the bottom 10% of candidates. Some staffing companies actually don't like that. So it really depends on what their drivers are, where their focus is. But either way, it's potentially an opportunity. We work with several of the largest staffing companies, so it certainly is a solution that can be at home in that process. But it may not be the same end of the day utilization as, let's say, a hospital recruitment team that's kind of after something else from a goal standpoint.
Wonderful. And I have a couple more questions. I know we're wrapping up soon. One of the questions that came in is we've always had a challenge with the idea of reference checking because the lead is providing the name of the reference, therefore the reference should be good. How does your online solution help to prevent this from happening?
Well, it's a great question because you'd think, all right, well, the reference, in the old style, olden days, we're doing this over the phone. They're giving me the names of people to call. Unless they're completely out of their tree, these people are going to be positive references. I'm not going to pick somebody to be a reference for me that is going to not be positive. It is, given that, it's sometimes amazing for people to understand. Like when you start to see some of the bad references come through, you got to remember this is anonymous. And while the references, it's made very clear to the references that your feedback will not be linked to your name. So it's going to be participating in this aggregation of data and of feedback. When the references understand, we make it real clear that they can speak freely and candidly and honestly, they're going to take every opportunity to do that. And sometimes it's a commentary on how self-actualized and realistic the candidate actually is. Oh, these people love me, I'll put them down. And believe me, there's a difference of opinion there. So I think if anything, it underscores how amazing you recreate this process in this automated fashion in which people feel safe and secure enough to respond honestly and candidly. I think it just underscores the importance. So just remember, you're going to virtually get no one to tell you bad things over the phone. Any net positive beyond that, and we're certainly going to be in that category, is going to be a benefit.
Wow, it helps to keep everybody honest. That's great.
Yeah, you could say that, yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, I thank you so much, Brian. It's been wonderful, finding out more about what you do and really understanding the process. Again, thank you to all of our attendees, and they'll receive an email afterwards with more information about the webinar recording, as well as some of the information, the tour of the product, and a download that they'll be able to do as well. We really enjoyed your time, Brian, and we want to thank SkillSurvey for sponsoring our webinar as well. And we want to see everyone back for our future webinars as well. Thank you so much, everyone.